Happy Halloween or Hallows Eve Day or National Goth Day or whatever the hell you want to call it today. Since it's a special occasion, I'm picking up a game that still manages to make me feel pretty uneasy, even with me hitting my 20s not that long ago. Yes, I know, I'm still pretty young for someone that plays these kind of games, but they were a staple of my childhood and overall life so far. If you know me at all, you know it takes quite a bit to keep me at the edge of my seat, since I'm like a weird goth person or something like that, according to society and my parents and normal people. There have been very few things that ever made me feel uneasy, and one of them was, for some strange reason, the movie Sinister. I don't know what it is, I really don't, but that was probably the only movie I've legitimately seen that made me feel uncomfortable by the time the movie ended. I recently rewatched it with my girlfriend, and she's also a pretty big horror movie person, and she also says the same thing about Sinister being like the only movie that's ever made her feel uncomfortable. Pretty weird. But one of the other very few things for me personally is the game that we're going to be looking at today. And despite it not being a tough game or anything, it is a very dark, unsettling game that seems like its main goal, aside from telling a solid, well thought out story, was to make the player question the lines between insanity and reality and feel very uncomfortable. And that game is Sanitarium, developed by Dreamforge Intertainment, I don't know why it's spelled that way, and published by ASC Games on April 30th, 1998, just when I was a mere fetus. If you bought it in stores, there were two versions you could get. The one that most people have is this digisleeve thing that you would see in those budget sections of computer stores. Best Buy carried these for years, and I remember seeing them all the time as a kid. The much less common one is the original retail big box that was sold for a much shorter period of time. But this, as you can tell instantly, is definitely worth the search. Just look at how beautiful this thing is. Huge shout out to my bro Andrew Topanian for helping me find this thing. It wasn't easy, but I was very lucky to snag this thing sometime last year for pretty cheap. They're typically between $50 and $100 for a big box copy these days, and they don't pop up that often in my experience. This one in particular dropped me about $30, so it is definitely possible to find them for cheap if you're willing to wait and search. Whether it's worth waiting for is entirely your call. But even if you don't like the game for whatever reason, you're wrong. It's still a beautiful piece of eye candy to keep on your shelf. If you want a physical copy but for some reason don't want to wait for the big box or don't want to spend the money on it, you can go and grab the digisleeve thing from like eBay or something, which is typically about $10. It's pretty cheap. But yeah, this box is definitely one of my favorite covers of all time for sure. I know I say that about way too many of these things, but this one's definitely up there in my top 10. Inside is a gatefold that already introduces you to how dark and morbid the game world is, and on the back it shows the typical blurbs and screenshots on the 90s big boxes. Feel free to pause and take a look if you want. And yeah, for some reason the game actually is rated T, but either the ESRB was on crack or they only played the first chapter of this game. This is 100% not supposed to be rated T by any means, and I'll explain that later on. For some strange reason, the protective cardboard inside the box doesn't quite match up with the dimensions of the box itself properly, so that's pretty weird, I guess. And this isn't just my copy. There's others I've seen with this game that have said the same thing to me about the dimensions not matching up, at least with this North American version of the game. Inside, all you get is a black and white 20-page manual, which is pretty useful and does its job, but I wish it had some color. And the game in a dual jewel case, which has the same blurb on the back of the box, on 3 sexy CD-ROM discs. Pretty lacking on the goodies, to be honest, but that awesome cover and gatefold just makes it all okay. It'll be okay. If you don't want this beautiful piece of eye candy, then you can also grab this game digitally on either Steam or GOG, but I'll get to that towards the end of the video. As far as my personal story with the game goes, I didn't have too much interest in it because it was a point-and-click game that was rated T. For one, I was not that big of a point-and-click person, but I did really enjoy the horror-themed point-and-click games, like Harvester, especially Harvester, Phantasmagoria, Shivers, Seventh Guest, and the others. but seeing that T rating made me think that it wouldn't be creepy or that it wouldn't be anything amazing or interesting, but damn was I wrong. So very, very wrong. What did catch my attention was that sexy ass big box, and I'm so glad that I spent the time hunting it down, even if it did take my friend to actually be the one to find the copy I grabbed, cause otherwise I would have never gotten to personally experience this game. So I don't have any real nostalgic memories towards this game, as this was my very first playthrough, which means you'll be getting a full unbiased review on this game for another like 20 minutes or so. Well, unbiased is a strong word because I like drool over anything spooky or horror based, but unbiased. At least as much as possible. This will be a review from someone that doesn't usually play these kinds of games that often and has only played a handful of them all the way through. So please keep that in mind if I'm inaccurate about something. So after installing the game, launching it will take you straight into the game intro, which then goes into the game itself. You can pause the game right after, and this is actually also the main menu.
New game. Delete. Use cinematic. Quit game.
After saving the game at least once, launching the game will bring you back up to this menu. Why it completely dismisses the main menu at all upon the first time launch is beyond me. Maybe it's to increase the immersion, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of this or not, to be honest, but it does get the job done, I guess, and the menu itself is awesome. I love the little eyes that follow the cursor around and the child whispering the name of the buttons you hover over with the little fade effect or whatever the hell it's called. It is pretty cool. I don't really want to go into too many spoilers, because this game, like pretty much every other point and click game in existence, is extremely story dependent. But I will go over the intro and some things that happen within the first few chapters just to discuss certain things, and after that I will be going into spoiler territory and letting you know. There will definitely be some visual spoilers, which is something that's very hard for me to avoid because I usually love showing every single thing I'm talking about, or anything that makes the game seem artistic in either a good or bad way, but whatever. Just know what you're going to get into here. The game intro I mentioned like a minute ago starts off by showing Max, the character you play as, crashing and then waking up in an asylum with amnesia, the most clever and unique game plot device of all time.
Hilarious and original!
It's then here that you're introduced to the gaming controls, which I'll get to shortly. The story itself is sort of like a mystery thing. You primarily play the game as Max and are trying to find his past and uncover all of the secrets buried beneath him. You start off knowing nothing, then slowly remembering things little by little as each chapter plays, and each of them are actually rather deep. Interestingly, the chapters all have you doing very different things for the most part, and they're all crazy and ridiculous and very enjoyable. You'll go from an asylum with a bunch of crackheads, then go to a town ruled by nothing but children, which is definitely one of my favorites and is much more unsettling than it sounds, to another asylum, to a circus with freaks, to a haunted mansion, to whatever the hell this is, and this is just the first half of the game. There are many more things here to be seen and played, but I'm gonna let you learn more if you decide to pick up this game. The only things you really need to learn about Max in the first couple of chapters are that he's got into a very bad accident that led him into his amnesia, and he has a sister that he was very close to but lost at a young age for unknown or unremembered reasons. The moment Max is going through these things involving his sister in particular are very strong and actually almost made me tear up. That is very rare coming from someone like me, and I'm not trying to sound like all macho, toxic masculinity or whatever, but I don't cry that much, and even less so with games and movies because I know they're all just fictional things. It takes something very well written for me to care enough about the characters and to feel myself tear-jerking or crying over them. The only other game that comes to mind for me is Witcher 3, and if you've played that game, you know exactly what part I'm talking about. This game has a damn good story, and if story is what you care about in the game, then you should start throwing your eye emojis or something at it. I don't know, whatever the hell you crazy kids are into these days. The visuals are absolutely stunning, running in glorious 640 by 480 res 256 color graphics. Everyone and their mother at the time wanted to make these weird 3D games, but thankfully they stuck with a much more polished 2D one. Or, well, isometric, but you get what I mean. This is one of those games that just have such beautiful art that even modern day indie devs would wet their pants upon starting this game. The imagery is so vivid, so depressing and morbid, yet so detailed, abstract, and even beautiful. It's both a gothic and an art lover's wet dream put into a reality. Or virtual reality, in this case. I just can't put it into words, but you can really tell the amount of effort they put into every single little detail by the visuals you've been looking at right now. But it's just a rated T game, bruh. Yeah, a rated T game that shows corpses thrown around in an elementary school, people getting sacrificed, impaled, experimented on, cremating a corpse yourself, this child digging up the corpse of his friend and dragging her around in this wagon. What the actual f***, ESRB? What kind of meth are you smoking? Nah, but Forsaken totally deserved that M rating. I mean, you just blow up ships, but oh my god, would somebody please think of the children? The gameplay itself plays like a normal point-and-click adventure, but instead of pointing and clicking, which still happens pretty much all the time, the game is isometric and you right-click and drag the mouse around to control Max. You can left-click on anyone to talk to them or interact with certain things, but Max is very special when it comes to pathfinding. Left-clicking also lets you attack in sections that require it, but that's actually also just clicking on things. You can also left-click on yourself to open up the inventory of whatever you've found so far in that specific chapter, and that's really it. The game overall is really that simple, followed by some usual point-and-click puzzles here and there. You can't ever permanently die in the game, but it is actually possible to fully screw up on some of the puzzles and let yourself get stuck in an unwinnable game loop, which can get very annoying because you probably won't have any idea when the hell it'll happen. For example, in the Circus of Fools chapter, you get tickets from winning a game, and you need tickets to complete things in the level and finish it. If you happen to not win any of the times you play and run out of tickets, you're completely screwed and have to start over. That's poor design in my opinion. This should have resulted in death unless you restarted the chapter or something, but now if this happens to you and you didn't save yet at all in the game for some reason, then you would have to start the entire game over. What a load of shit. So always be careful with what you do in this game. Thankfully, they're beyond generous with the amount of save slots you can have, and if you actually die in a segment that involves some sort of combat, which again is just clicking on things, then you respawn in the start of that specific area, and it's no big deal at all. The parts that you need to be careful about are the puzzles. Save often and you'll be fine. Specifically, at the very least, save the second you start a new chapter into a new slot each time. You'll be really glad you did. Trust me, I'm a professional. The game is fun overall, less for the actual gameplay itself and more for the dialogue choices, the sense of exploration, creepiness, atmosphere, and the story. But despite that, the game isn't perfect and it's not without its weak moments. Moments like these where you play as some sort of Aztec god, Olmec, and some sort of comic book character that exists in the game world. They're not terrible by any means like I've heard most people say, and I actually did still enjoy them, but they feel very out of place compared to everything else. At least in the moments when you're not playing as Max himself, you're usually still playing as a character that's in some way, shape, or form related to the story that's being told and discovered of Max's past. Parts like the Grimwald chapter and the Aztec chapter feel like they were just more last-minute things kind of thrown in there. There is a reason they were put in there, but I'll get to that later on. The player movement in general, regardless of the chapter or character you're playing as, is extremely slow, clunky, and awkward to control. This is one of the biggest gripes I have about this game. For a game that has you mainly exploring and going to different places and walking, I think the movement should have felt much, much smoother than it was. Sometimes you'll move in really weird directions, other times it'll take you what feels like 20 minutes to get from where you are to another end of the map because of how goddamn slow you move, and just the feeling of walking in general feels very off. There's like a heap of messiness or something with it, especially when it comes to stair sections like these. You could try moving the character directly upwards, and they'll just do a complete 180-degree turn and start climbing back down the stairs. Moments like these were extremely annoying and frustrating to me. Going back to the combat sections that need some very light explaining, you can tell when you're in this mode because of the animation states, the intensity of the music playing, and the attack animation playing when you're clicking on things. As I said, you can't actually permanently die in these areas, and instead you'll just respawn at the start of the area. Your health is measured by a heartbeat that gets faster the closer you get to death. I think this was done to increase the immersion because there's no HUD whatsoever, and it does definitely work in that regard. The puzzles and overall progression are also rather ridiculous, and you might need a guide in order to play the game at all. This is sort of just expected in games in this genre, and part of why I so very rarely play them, if at all. But, I mean, what the hell? Some of this stuff just makes me wonder how the hell anyone even managed to finish this game back in the day. Some of them are very creative and doable, like this moment when you hook wires to the thingy, or this moment when you have to play different records to get reactions out of people based on their personality, or this dragonfly-y puzzle thing, or even this thing when you hear the song and you have to open a door with the same pattern.
Caged Cyclops children! Yes!
Those are pretty cool and creative, and you can figure those out on your own without it being way too difficult. But some of them don't explain anything to you at all really, and have little to do with anything else, so they can leave you really confused. Like this part, for example. I had no idea what the hell to do, and I assumed that when I finished turning things I had to pull the chain on the left, but instead I had to pull the switch on the right because the chain does absolutely nothing. Others are extremely tedious, like this water thing. And also, there's times when you need to be ultra specific on what you click on to progress. Again, I know this is expected, but holy shit is it annoying. Like this time in the Aztec level when you have to pick up a bowl and, like, how the hell am I supposed to see that? Or in the same level when you're supposed to talk to 6 spirits, and one of them, which is hiding all the way up here like a little bitch and confused me for like an hour, and then needing to know the order of each of them from youngest to eldest, like, dude, what the hell? Even in the first freaking chapter, you're supposed to pick this rag up. How the hell would you know to pick this tiny-ass rag up without reading a guide or randomly clicking every single thing? Who even knows? Usually, you would try to figure out little things that'll typically help you progress. What does the rag do? It lets you slide across this big wire. Yes, when I want to slide across a wire, the first thing I'm going to look for is a rag. Awesome. I mean, I guess it makes sense because asylums don't have that much or something, but that's besides the point I'm trying to make. I'm pretty certain this is why people don't really play these kinds of games anymore, but at least this game has atmosphere and story that are good enough to make you want to push through. So, you're probably thinking the puzzles are annoying, the movement feels like drugs, and there are some things that are big dumb. Yeah, the story is good, but is that it? And the answer is no. There are many interesting little details thrown in the game's background that just make you wonder what else the devs decided to throw in there. Moments like these kids dancing around a pumpkin, this guy thinking he's Elvis.
Like you've shed a few pounds since that Hawaiian concert.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Where is that awful music coming from?
I wish I knew, man.
This other guy listening to the band Dismember for the first time. A pastor in a chapel with these wooden people that he thinks are his followers or something. And this. Yeah. Neat. I also mentioned atmosphere throughout this review, and this game literally bleeds with it. The visuals play half the part, of course, but the sound and music do the other half. You need both. The voice acting is interesting, to say the least.
My God, so many corpses. It's horrible. Who would butcher these people like this? That's horrendous. How could she do such a thing to a child?
It's okay.
Who is your friend?
Crag.
Well, what's wrong with him? Does he have laryngitis? Slice and dice, baby.
Yeah, I know. I felt the same way then, I feel the same way now. So cheesy and overacted, and I love it. Most definitely not for everybody, but at the same time, arguably pretty enjoyable. I also found it kind of funny how sometimes lines are lower in volume than others directly after them. There are some very serious and dark moments when the voice acting is actually quite impressive given the time the game released. Trying not to go too much into spoiler territory, but there is a specific chapter in the game that Max is recalling something that had happened in his past. And at the very end of that memory, something tragic happens and you can really feel the painful sorrow in his voice. And that was definitely not something that very many people were able to pull off in the late 90s. Also, another moment in the game when you can just really feel the pain and sorrow of this creature in its voice is this. I mean, listen to this.
Vince left me for I am a freak now.
Excellent job of voice acting on moments like that. But the sound and music are what helps the game world feel truly unsettling. I can't even find the proper words to do the music justice. It just sets the mood and the tone and atmosphere of the game so perfectly and really just kills the presentation. I might sound like I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm really not. If you haven't been hearing the music like I've been playing in the background for the last 20 minutes or so, then do yourself a favor and listen to this. Like, close your eyes right now and try painting a picture in your head with just this music. If you didn't picture something like this, try it again. It's some really good stuff. The tracks were all composed by Stephen Bennett and James C. McMeanamy, both of which really deserve some appreciation for their help making this game feel more alive than it already was. Or dead, in this case. The sound kicks all kinds of ass too, especially this really cool fading sound effect thing when you go in and out of buildings or specific areas.
What horrible living conditions.
And they're both equally important. But that music though. Before I go into the closing, I wanted to get my thoughts on the ending out on here, so this is totally up for discussion if you have played this. If you've never played this game before, please skip to the timestamp I'm about to show. Save yourself and play this game and unravel the story on your own. It'll be a much better experience for you, I promise. There's so many theories from different people as to what actually... Shut up. Oh my god. There's so many different theories from different people as to what actually happened, and that's one of the things I really love about this game. People are getting their own thoughts about what happened here, and it can change based on how one thinks what each thing means in the game. Although, as it clearly states on the back of the box for some reason, there is one thing for certain. The chapters you go through in this game are all occurring in Max's head, with the question of Max being either completely delusional or sane but in some sort of nightmare world throughout the game. Due to the ending cutscene, there seems to be some discussion on multiple theories as to what happened, some of which say only specific moments happened in Max's head, while others actually happened in Max's real life. His sister passing was definitely real, but there's things like some of the asylum that I've seen people try to argue that it's real, and that's totally okay. It's very clear what happens here is left up to the player's interpretation, but the developers clearly wanted you to piece together certain things, and whether that's actually clear to others or not, I have no idea. The very first level starts off in what is metaphorically Max's head. Why do I say that? Well, at the end of each chapter, you can tell how the game worlds are connected, each of them being something involving Max or his past, and each of these are supposed to be fragments of things going on inside of Max's head. Whether they are the past, daydreams, or current events going on in his head at the moment. In the very first chapter in the asylum, you'll talk to a handful of patients, all of which are loopy in the head but will say something about the reason that they're there, all of them being the basis for future chapters. Like one of the patients not wanting to talk to you because their mother said not to talk to strangers, mirroring Mother in the next chapter, one of them thinking they're in some sort of circus before falling off the ledge, mirroring the Circus of Fools, another one thinking they're being attacked by insects, mirroring the Hive, and another one saying they're talking to or hearing fallen warriors, mirroring the Aztec chapter that nobody really seems to figure out why it was in the game. Everything was put into this game for a reason, even if it feels like a complete disconnect from the rest. At the end of the game, Max wakes up, realizes that Dr. Morgan really was trying to kill him this entire time by injecting poison and or drugs into him and sabotaging his brakes in the beginning of the game, being the entire reason he crashed in the first place. It reveals in the radio at the end that this is in fact what happened, and Dr. Morgan thankfully gets arrested due to this. Thank God. One thing I really thought strongly about this game was some of the indirect backstory of Max. Him not being able to fulfill his sister's last request before death affected him throughout his entire life, and was more than likely the reason he grew up to be a doctor and save children. I believe this also explains the meaning behind the second chapter of the game. The mutated kids are all kids that the adults need to cure because they aren't successful, they die instead of the kids. I could be way off on that last part, but it's definitely about the mutated children being representative of the ones that Max spent his life trying to save. I wish more games had deep plots that made you think about stuff like that. I also think that the same chapter, The Innocent Abandoned, is probably one of the best things I've ever experienced in a game. Everything was done so perfectly in that chapter. And if you're watching this and you have played it, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And lastly, I also liked the little religious undertones in this game. There isn't any clearly described, but there is a mention of a higher being taking out bad people in communities, with Mother at the end of Innocent Abandoned talking about that. She also had me really thinking about humanity, saying humans are the only animals that kill for sport, referring to humans as meat, and names being nothing but a mere animal noise. Damn. And lastly, I really loved how Dr. Morgan was slowly introduced as the antagonist rather than some big spooky being shown off with square one. The writing, man, it's so good. That was more of a jumbled mess of my thoughts on the game's plot and how it ended, but this is a pretty difficult game to lay everything out smoothly for, so mission accomplished, woohoo, yeah. Anyways, so is Sanitarium worth playing, and does it still hold up today? Well, it's definitely worth playing. If you play it, it's something that you probably won't ever forget, whether you like the game or not. It's just one of those games that are just a little bit too bizarre, which is a good thing in my opinion. Unfortunately though, point-and-click adventure games have objectively not aged very well, so they aren't something that's going to appeal to the casual gamer due to the really specific and complex nature of the puzzles and paths. And this game in specific, no, it really didn't age that well. I mean, it's really the specific nature of finding essential plot things needed to progress. Like, some of them you would need to click every single frame in the game to figure out what it is you actually need, or where you actually need to use something in your inventory. That, and some of the really annoying puzzles that don't really make much sense or have anything to do with anything. And there's some moments that kinda go too far and lose their touch by changing the feel and story of the game entirely. Although, this is where I would actually still recommend Sanitarium to anyone watching this regardless, because of how much of everything else it does right. Despite all of the negatives, this game does have a really strong charm to it, and it's not that surprising that people are still coming back to it over 2 decades later, giving it its cult classic status. The visuals still hold up beautifully today. The story and the mystery, narration, character development, and writing are all brilliantly executed. And the sound, music, and overall atmosphere are just god tier. Especially the music. You can't go wrong with that really brooding and foreboding sense you get whenever you hear it. And the game just feels like you're inside of somebody's nightmare or something, I don't know. It's a real fun time. If I didn't mention it already, despite me playing through this game entirely only once, and despite its issues here and there, I would really have to say this is my favorite point-and-click adventure game of all time so far. At least it's very close to being it. I'm currently also trying out the Gabriel Knight games for the first time, and I'm also really loving those. But this one is really just something else. Even as a horror game, it's... Shut up. Even as a horror game, it's definitely up there too, since the use of jump scares are 100% non-existent, and it even completely removes the chance of permanent death, but still manages to crawl up your skin effortlessly. Games with much better atmosphere are much better horror games to me than games that just force you to run away from things and get jump scared every 5 seconds. Outlast. I've never picked a game as my favorite that I've played less than 3 times. So that's the first and probably only time that'll ever happen. It's also one of my best friend's favorite games too, and he's only in chapter 4 of the game so far. So, yeah. By the time you're done with this game, you'll feel like you belong in the Sanitarium or something. I don't know. So if you're a goth nerd or a horror lover like me, that's craving a real work of art that's actually pretty freaking eerie, has a story and characters that you'll actually give a damn about, and you're willing to go into it with an open mind and overlook some of the game's genre-specific shortcomings, and experience some of the best horror music you'll probably ever hear in a really long time, then do yourself a solid and check this one out at some point. Again, it's very easy to pick this game up unless you're going for that original big box. Those DigiSleep copies are still very cheap and easy to find since they were like everywhere. If you don't want to bother with a physical copy because you're too busy burning those papers for like bad people drugs or something like everyone else is these days, sadly, then head over to GOTH.com and get the game digitally on there. It's practically the same price as the DigiSleep copies, although physical copies won't work on modern systems, so you might actually want to just grab the digital one. I don't know. It's up to you. I strongly recommend getting a physical copy and playing this on a real Windows 98 PC, since the experience is much better, but I'm just some random edgelord that nobody listens to or something, so whatever. If you get it on GOG, it runs perfectly on anything Windows 10 or lower. It doesn't need disk switching. It doesn't need disk switching like the original, doesn't need any annoying tinkering beforehand, and is 100% DRM and crash free. But there are some very notable performance drops, and they're instantly noticeable on this video since I played the GOG version to capture footage. I do have a capture card, thanks to my buddy Tom, although I can't capture audio on it just yet, so I had to use my Windows 10 for the time being. I do have some footage on it that I made for comparison purposes, so take a look at these version differences. This is what it's supposed to look like on Windows 95 and 98 machines. And this is what it looks like on the digital versions for modern OS. So yeah, you make the choice on that. I also don't personally have the Steam version, but I'm assuming it's the exact same thing, only with achievements. Usually GOG's versions work much better since Steam barely gets their retro games updated, but that's not the case every single time, so again, your call. I'm sorry, I'm a little platform prejudice. The game is $10 on Steam, $10 on GOG, and $10 for the physical discs and that DigiSleep thing. The choice is yours, my friends. So yeah, get this game in some way, shape, or form. Even if you're not big on point-and-click games, neither am I. It's okay. It's all good, man. I'm just drunk.
Oh my god! Is he dead?
No, I'm just drunk.
What?
I'm just...
Oh my god!
Nah, but seriously, play it. Even if you're not watching this on which day. Just go. Just go and play it. Cause it's good. Go check it out. You'll be glad you did. You can thank me later for this beautiful game.